right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening for the Minneapolis Ward 5 Virtual Candidate Forum hosted by Make Homes Happen. We're so glad to have you all with us this evening. My name is Katie Dillon. I'm the director at Align Minneapolis, a Make Homes Happen member, and I will be the MC and moderator for the evening. A few housekeeping items before we begin. We are using Zoom webinar, which means you can see and hear us, but we can't see or hear you. We are recording the webinar and we will share it to the Make Homes Happen Facebook page by the end of the month. Audience members, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to type in any questions that you have for the candidates. They'll be able to answer your questions directly in a little bit. Finally, for candidates who would like to do so, I invite you at this time to share your website, contact page, or email address in the chat in case voters want to follow up with additional questions. As you all know, we have an important election coming up on November 2nd in less than 2 months. All 13 Minneapolis City Council members and the Minneapolis Mayor are up for election this year, as are all Park Board members and 2 Board of Estimate and Taxation members. To see exactly who will be on your ballot, visit the Secretary of State website on September 17th or later. For information about when, where, and how to vote, visit www.vote.minneapolismn.gov. Maggie, who's managing our tech tonight, will make sure that these links get shared in the chat. Additionally, Minneapolis has ranked choice voting elections. This November, you will have the power to rank your first, second, and third choice candidates on your ballot. If your first choice does not continue in the instant runoff, your vote goes to your second choice. And if your second choice does not continue, your vote goes to your third choice. You should rank as many candidates as you prefer, up to 3. When you listen tonight to your candidates, consider not just your first choice, but also your second or third. Before we hear from candidates, let me tell you a little bit about Make Homes Happen. We are a coalition of community-based groups and organizations that advocate for affordable housing development, preservation, and tenants' rights in Minneapolis. In 2017, we helped successfully push for a $40 million investment to the Minneapolis Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Yet even then, the housing needs of our community far outweighed the dollars spent. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated what was already a housing crisis, and we know housing is a critical issue for our city. City leaders have significant influence on the policies, programs, and funding choices that impact our community. That's why Make Homes Happen is hosting this forum tonight. In order to ensure the fairness of our election series, Make Homes Happen used a uniform process in communicating with candidates. We approached each candidate and invited them to participate in a Zoom interview about housing. The interview included 3 questions, and candidates had 2 minutes to respond to each question. We recorded candidates' answers, and we'll play them back for you now as opening statements for this event. Note that we did not edit the content of candidate responses, but we did cut each answer off at 2 minutes. Anything that was said after 2 minutes will not be shared here today. This was done to ensure standardization across the interviews we conducted. Finally, candidates who did not participate in the Zoom interview will each have 2 minutes to present an opening statement live today. So let's get ready to hear from our candidates. Maggie will play the recorded Zoom interview for us. We'll start with Kristel Porter, who is the only Ward 5 candidate who completed a video questionnaire. Thank you, Maggie.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
Yeah, so I do think that they are headed in the right direction. And I think that a lot of people are starting to bring up the question around affordable housing. I think it's becoming more of a hot topic now more than ever, and probably that's because of the pandemic. That's probably because of you know, the $350 million of property damage that has happened in the past year and a half. And I do think the city is making the right steps as far as, you know, the inclusionary zoning requirements included in the 2040 plan, comprehensive plan. I think that that is a good step in the right direction. I do think that there are some things that we do need to address within that inclusionary zoning that could make it even better for folks that need housing to be affordable. And yeah, I think that one thing would be in one situation, there is a loophole that's provided for developers that must develop a percentage of affordable housing within their developments. And I don't feel there should be a loophole. I feel that it should be, they should have to build that percentage of affordable housing in their developments. There shouldn't be a fee that they get to pay to not have to do it. And I feel that they shouldn't have a loophole to where they can build anywhere else in the city affordable units, instead build a whole market rate building and then build affordable in a place that already has a high concentration of affordable housing, which leaves certain communities.
Time. Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
So there's a few I would like to cover. I mean, I just mentioned one, the loophole that allows developers to, I mean, it says that you're supposed to build, you know, 4 to 8% of affordable units within the building that you are building currently. And then also they have that loophole that they are able to take advantage of to not have to build affordable units. But also the fact that HUD defines 60% AMI is $60,000 for households of 4. And, you know, when you do that, that's a blanket over Minneapolis and St. Paul. And when you're somebody who lives in North Minneapolis, that means that we would have to make $100,000 a year in our households when we have neighborhoods in North Minneapolis that have an AMI of $28,000 a year. So I think that needs to be looked at. I think that we need to start redefining what low income is, and it needs to be more hyper focused on the area that we're actually developing in, instead of looking at the entire state or the entire metro area. I also think that should be brought down, and when they're saying 60% AMI, you know, why can't we include, you know, out of that 4 to 8%, which I actually think the 4 to 8% should be raised to 10%. And then also, you know, why aren't we looking at 30% area median income? There's a lot of people who are at 30%, if you want to be real. So yeah, I think that we need to start looking at what area median income and low income actually looks like in the area that the property is being built. And then also TIF should not be used to protect the profit margin.
Time. What are the practical skills and or lived experience that you would bring to your role as a city council member that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
Yeah, so my experience, I actually left home when I was 14 years old. I got my first apartment when I was 16 years old. I had to move every year of my life and had to replace my belongings many times. So I know it's like a renter and having to live in some of the worst housing in the city of Minneapolis because I had no other choice. I also know what it's like to come out of poverty and get to the point where you can actually purchase property. I'm a landlord now, and I rent an affordable unit in North Minneapolis and have always remained to keep it very affordable. But it is not easy to do that. It's very difficult. And so I understand from that lens as well. I've also taken a training. I've gone through several trainings actually when it comes to affordable development. I understand that it's almost impossible to develop affordably without getting heavy subsidies. It could take 3 years to get a project done when it comes to building affordable rental properties and affordable housing. And that shouldn't be the case. It's been made so difficult for developers to be able to develop affordable housing that they have just decided not to do it. There's so many layers on top of so many layers. And I think that we need to get more creative on how to finance affordable housing developments so that we can actually get it done and it isn't so difficult to make it happen. So I would say that that is my experience. I have a lived experience of, coming from the deepest dark depths of poverty, rising up to the point where I am a landlord and understand that nowadays it costs $20 for a 2x4. When I was younger, it cost $2.14. So we have to address these issues, and we need to, it's going to take someone that truly understands to be able to make it happen and to be able to address the issue correctly.
Thank you, and thanks for that video, Kristel. Now you will hear from the candidate who did not participate in the recorded Zoom interview. The candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce themselves to you now. So Jeremiah, you have 2 minutes to introduce yourself, and I'll start your time when you begin speaking.
Thank you so much for having me here. Happy to be here with Make Homes Happen, and thank you guys for all the advocacy you've done. My name is Jeremiah Ellison. I'm currently the representative on the City Council for Ward 5 here on the North Side. I'm born and raised here on the North Side, and housing has been one of my main focuses since being in office in these last 4 years. I was the author of the city's tenant protections, which limited security deposits so that folks weren't being gouged through their security deposits, but also instituted a limited look back on reasons that people could be discriminated against for housing. I worked on the city's renter first policy, which is an internal policy that deals with how we regulate and go after and hold bad landlords accountable. The city used to have a policy that held the landlord accountable, but also ousted the tenant. And I felt like through certain legal tools like a TRA, which I'm sure we can get into throughout the forum, the city would be able to hold landlords accountable while also maintaining the tenant's ability to stay in the unit. I've been somebody who's focusing on housing policy like tenant opportunity to purchase, which I think is a policy, if instituted correctly, could help us close the gap on the home ownership gap that we have between Black folks, folks of color, and white people in our city. And I also was the author of the rent stabilization charter amendment that voters are going to be voting on in just a couple of months here. I think it's critically important with rising costs of living that people have an opportunity to not have, especially on the North Side, to not have their rents increased by 10%, 25%, 50%. We've seen this happening in Minneapolis. And so housing is going to remain a top priority of mine. And I'm excited to talk about all of the housing policy that I've been able to work on since being in office so far.
Thank you. All right, and thank you so much, candidates, for being here tonight and for introducing yourselves to us, either just now or through our video questionnaire. We're now ready to move on to the next phase of our event, where we will hear directly from the candidates in response to audience questions. So if you're joining us today, please use the Q&A feature to ask any housing-related questions you have for the candidates. Make Homes Happen has also prepared a few questions to get us started. To be fair, we're going to rotate which candidate answers first. Candidates, you will each have 2 minutes to respond to the question. We will time you and mute you at 2 minutes. We're going to start with Jeremiah Ellison for our first question. And I'm going to start with one of our prepared questions while we wait for some of the audience to write in some questions. Describe one of the most effective measures that the city of Minneapolis could use to support and preserve naturally occurring affordable housing in the market.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think that one of the things that we need to be utilizing in order to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing is the state's NOAA tax credit. We've been able to utilize that for the past, I think, 2.5 years, 2 years. And I think it's a tool that we need to continue to utilize. I also think that it's important that we engage with small landlords about how they are keeping their rents low if they are. And I think that we need to take a look at how we do assessments. We know we want values to rise. We want people to have equity in their homes, but we also know that, again, in places like North Minneapolis, where people tend to make it a home and aren't looking to sell, rapidly rising assessments, 30%, increases in your value can have a displacing effect on people who are looking to stay where they are. And so those are just a handful of things that I think we could do to preserve NOAA. And I also, I also think that there's a lot that we could be doing. And I know that this sort of goes into no affordability is completely free, right? I mean, I've even heard folks say, naturally occurring affordable housing these days, especially, doesn't necessarily happen so much naturally. And so I think we need to continue to figure out what are those financial tools that we can leverage in order to make sure that people can make improvements while not having to hike up their rents by a large margin. I also think that rent stabilization could go a long way. We know that rent increases can happen sometimes due to just pure speculation. And so by having a measure that prevents some gouging when land values become enticing, I think will go a long way in helping keep rents manageable for people.
Thank you. Right on time. And Kristel, would you like me to go ahead and repeat? I'll go ahead and repeat the question. How about that? Describe one of the most effective measures that the city of Minneapolis could use to support and preserve naturally occurring affordable housing in the market.
I think this is definitely a relationship with Hennepin County as well when it comes to just what Jeremiah Ellison said with assessments, and also how we capture property tax is very important. Last year in North Minneapolis, we had seen the highest increase of property taxes than anywhere else in the city. And there was some parts of the city, especially around the lakes, where people were actually getting a rebate. So in a community that has a very low area median income, you could see how that would be a problem. So I think that they could be a little more intentional about how property taxes increase. And when we talk about, not increasing rents by, 15, 20, 30%, we also have to make sure that mortgages don't increase by 200%. I know a lot of people that live in North Minneapolis where their mortgages have actually doubled in the last 7 years because of the rise in the housing market and the cost of the homes and their property value increased and around them, which also made their properties increase as well. So when you are a local landlord that maybe owns one property or two, if your mortgage doubles, you have to increase the rent. So I think that the city could be a little more intentional on making sure that that we don't increase property taxes to a point where people can barely pay their mortgage anymore. And then also providing incentives for landlords that are good landlords that take care of their tenants and also remain in a tier 1 status. And have less fines and complaints against the property as well. And I think that offering incentives also set the property low.
You and you are at time. All right, and Kristel will have you answer the next question. And this is also one of our prepared questions. What will you do as council member to ensure the city has adequate funding and policies for the production of new, affordable, and accessible housing stock?
I think we need to get very creative when it comes to this. We have some local CDCs throughout the city of Minneapolis, and those are really great organizations that are able to take advantage of government grants, but also a mix of different grants as well, that can develop affordable housing and sell it at cost, so that we can increase the amount of building wealth and wealth generation. Because a lot of people that are living in affordable housing right now would like to own a property at some point, and the main reason why they want, or the main reason why they are living in affordable housing is because they haven't had the opportunity to build wealth. So I think that you know, making sure that we work with local CDCs, neighborhood organizations that have access to NRP funds, and then also working with their state legislators to create more tax increment financing districts as well, so that we can start boosting NRP yet again. I think the city actually failed the neighborhood associations throughout the city of Minneapolis and not educating them and making them aware that this NRP was actually expiring, and they had an opportunity to lobby at the state in 2019 when it expired. So I think that if we get a little more creative to make sure that we boost the amount of funds that are available to be able to build and develop affordable housing, and then working with local CDCs and neighborhood associations so that we can start allocating, especially the many empty lots that are out throughout our city that have nothing there, or a lot of boarded up and vacant buildings, working with a mixture. I mean, it's not just the city, it's the county, it's the state, and making sure that we are able to build that housing and selling it at cost, like I said, because right now.
Thank you. You are at time. Thanks. All right. I'm just going to encourage attendees to please go ahead and put some questions in the chat. We will continue to ask some prepared questions, but I know that the candidates want to hear from you as well. All right. So the next question, sorry about that. And I'm just realizing, Jeremiah, did I give you a chance to answer this one as well? I didn't, did I? Okay. All right, you can call me on that. That's fine. So tell us, in your perspective, what will you do as council member to ensure the city has adequate funding and policies for the production of new, affordable, and accessible housing stock?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things I think that's really important is continuing to fight for the trust fund to be as big as it has been. You know, one thing that people might not know is that in the past 4 years, the city's actually built more affordable units at every level, right? At 30% AMI, at 50% AMI, at 6% AMI. We've been exceeding the Met Council goals for affordable housing in these past couple of years, which prior to this term, this council and this mayor, we weren't even meeting the goals, and now we've been in a position to exceed them. And so I think continuing to fight for, you know, an allocation from the general fund into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is going to be something that's really important. But for most people who are watching this, especially if they have some knowledge of how this stuff works, they know that our Affordable Housing Trust Fund is not truly a trust fund, right? That money is not dedicated. We have to fight for it to be there every single year, and there's no regular source. And I think that some folks have some really creative ideas about where the city could get a regular source of money in order to have a true trust fund. Other cities have utilized some version of bonding in order to be able to ensure that we can have a regular amount that we're putting into housing. I think that we should look at that. I know that the cities like Austin and places like Portland have done bonds for, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars in order to ensure that they can build affordable housing sustainably into the future. I struggle to, you know, kind of bring this into it, but I also think that it is important, in addition to having a regular source of funding.
Sorry to cut you off, you're at time. All right, let's move on to the next question, and we'll start with Jeremiah on this one. Considering what you know about cost-burdened and vulnerable renters in the city, What will you do as a city council member to improve the overall quality and accessibility of their housing options?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think number one, we need to work on people making better incomes. I won't get too far into that, but I do think that we need to work on people getting better incomes. But I think what we can do on the housing front is we can double down on some of the work that we've begun. And so I mentioned the renter first policy, which is a policy that is allowing us to do tenant remedies actions. This means that we can take adverse action against a recalcitrant landlord, a negligent landlord, without evicting that tenant in the process. I think that we need to diversify the type of housing that we make available. And I think that we need to invest in things like the missing middle pilot program like we've had. In terms of diversifying housing stock, Envision Homes is a model that I think that we're going to get to see piloted in the next couple of years here, and it's a model that is really pioneered by folks who are transitioning out of homelessness. And so I think we need to be listening to people who are experiencing our city and provide the housing that they're telling us to, because they're the ones being innovative. And so all we got to do is listen.
Thank you. And Kristel, I'll go ahead and reread the question as well. Yes, considering what you know about cost-burdened and vulnerable renters in the city, what will you do as a city council member to improve the overall quality and accessibility of their housing options?
I'm gonna, piggyback off your mind. To be honest, we do need to get a little more creative when it comes to providing housing. Not everybody wants a single family home with 2 bathrooms and 5 bedrooms. Not everybody's gonna have children. Not everybody wants to rent and not everybody wants to own. We do need to be a little more intentional about making sure that we are building and providing housing for our growing and changing demographics. Right now, our senior population is at about 18 to 19% in North Minneapolis, and that's expected to almost double in 2030. And there's not enough senior housing in our community, and all of it is low income. And a lot of the seniors that own their homes, when they sell them, they will have to leave the community because they won't qualify for it. And even the ones that do qualify for low income, actually, it takes about 3 years to get into the housing, which, a lot can happen in a senior's life in 3 years. Also, when it comes to youth, a lot of people don't understand that youth need housing as well. There's a lot of youth that that leave home when they're teenagers or right when they're 18 years old, and they don't have anything that they can afford. In our part of the community, there isn't rooms to rent with shared spaces. There's limited opportunity for that. And of course, we got to focus on our homeless population as well. There's a lot of people, our homeless encampments are growing, and a lot of those folks came out of Transition Plus in Minneapolis public schools. And I feel like they should have, we should have made sure that they had housing and jobs by the time they exited out of the Minneapolis public school system. And of course, working with our blighted communities to boost the commercial corridors so that we can create more jobs and income sources within communities that have high unemployment rates. That would be very important in order for people to secure housing. So, yeah.
Thank you. You're at time. All right, the next question, we will go again with one of our prepared questions. Again, attendees, I encourage you to submit your questions via the Q&A. We'll start with Kristel on this one. What is your position on the rent stabilization charter amendment that will be on this year's ballot, and your views on enacting a future rent stabilization policy within Minneapolis?
Thank you. So my position on it is I'm going to support whatever the voters choose to vote for. No matter what I believe, I think that people are going to speak and they're going to vote, and we're going to end up with a situation that we're going to have to move forward with. And so one thing I would say is rent stabilization can provide opportunity for people who are seeing the rent increase, especially based on the housing market and how it's drastically increasing higher than we've seen in our lives. And so that offers a sense of security. Currently, right now, we don't really know what's going to be in this rent stabilization because it's an opportunity for people to vote on it. So we don't know what's going to happen once people vote on it. We don't know what the meat is in the sandwich. Right now, all we know is, no increase, but more than 3% of rents per year. And right now, the city of Minneapolis, the rent increases anywhere between about 1.5% to 2% right now currently. As a smaller landlord myself, my tenant didn't pay rent for about 9 months. So we're, working with zero balance to make sure that they could pay their rent. But at the same time, how am I going to manage the property, especially when the mortgage has doubled in the last 7 years? So I worry about that, especially with a lot of the friends that I have that live in North Minneapolis that they all are Black and they own rental properties. And are having a very difficult time holding and securing those properties. 80% of the rental properties in North Minneapolis are single family homes. And if those landlords pull out, we might see those properties disappear or get sold.
We're at time. Thank you.
Time.
It's a hard job to have to cut people off. All right. And Jeremiah, what is your position on the rent stabilization charter amendment that will be on this year's ballot and your views on enacting a future rent stabilization policy within Minneapolis?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, I was honored to author the charter change that people will be voting on this November. And so, when I'm on the dais, I can't say this because I can't, promote the thing. But in this setting, I think I can say I hope people vote for it. I hope people vote for our ability to enact a rent stabilization policy. And I strongly believe that it's one of the many tools that our city needs in order to ensure housing stability for folks and affordability. And should it pass and should we be able to pursue a substantive policy? And real quick, for folks that don't know, in most states, the state makes it very clear cities can either pass a policy like this or they can't. But in the state of Minnesota, because we're so complicated, we kind of have a state law that says, you can't pass it unless you do this two-step process. And so the two-step process is, first, the people need to give us permission, and second, we need to pass a substantive policy. And we're in that step one right now. And so if you vote yes in November on this question, you'll be saying, I want the city to be able to explore a substantive question. As far as what the policy will look like once, if we're able to pass something, I'm probably going to be, no matter what, I'm going to be looking at, what does the data say? What does the engagement say? We still want to, folks to be able to build new affordable housing, and we still want to make sure that landlords can make improvements to their units, especially if they're not in the greatest condition. But we don't want gouging, and we don't want too many loopholes as to make the policy meaningless, right? And so I'm always going to fight for the most strict policy, but even if we have a more lenient policy, I think that it's going to serve people and keep them stable in their homes.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. So the next question, I'm just going to check in the Q&A and make sure we don't have any audience. Here we got an audience question. So I'm going to go ahead and read this one. Hello, my name is Ricardo, and I work as a coalition organizer with the Blue Line Coalition. Since 2013, BLC has advocated for affordable housing and anti-displacement measures to be considered and applied with the development of the Blue Line Extension Project. As you know, the route of the Blue Line is changing. What is your plan or ideas to not miss any opportunities built from previous efforts and mitigate previous harm done in neighborhoods such as Harrison? And what are your ideas and plans to avoid any more harm to take place in Minneapolis due to the development of the Blue Line extension? So this question, we're going to start with Jeremiah.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you for the work you're doing on the Blue Line, Ricardo. So a few things. One is, I'm in these conversations around the Blue Line as well. I'm having the same conversations, and quite frankly, this development is not going to happen if we can't have anti-gentrification measures, if we can't have true stabilization, and if we can't mitigate some of the harm that's already been done from, I think, the haphazard way in which this rolled out when it was supposed to go down Olson Highway. For my part, we have a pretty blunt tool when it comes to this kind of infrastructure, and that is to deny municipal consent. Now, I hope it doesn't come to that, but if the city is not getting a true benefit, if North Minneapolis is not getting a true benefit from the development of the Blue Line extension, then denying municipal consent is going to be something that we have to consider. It's going to be something that I have to talk to my colleagues about, and that I'll be very vocal about if I think we're getting to that point. Right now, I'm hearing really encouraging things from, Irene Fernando at the county and other people involved in this project. And so I don't think we're at the point where we're having to pull that lever yet. But I think a few things need to happen. One is that this is going to have to be an intergovernmental partnership, right? The county's going to have skin in the game. The city's going to have skin in the game. Two, I think that, safety improvements along Olson Highway absolutely have to be a part of this project. And honestly, safety improvements on Olson Highway should have been a given, and they should have never been conditioned on building the Blue Line down Olson Highway. I think that we also need to create an acquisition fund so that we can be able to have some site control over the land around the corridor so that we can get it into the hands of local businesses and local developers to be able to build both affordable housing and commercial space that's going to serve the neighborhood. And I'm out of time, so I could go on a little bit longer, but these are just some of the things that I think are going to happen as we proceed in this Blue Line discussion.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Kristel, I'll go ahead and read the question portion of this. What are your plans and ideas to not miss any opportunities to build from previous efforts and mitigate previous harm done in neighborhoods such as Harrison? And what are your ideas and plans to avoid any more harm to take place in Minneapolis due to the development of the Blue Line extension project?
One thing I will say is I have been doing a lot of engagement around the Blue Line, actually. I have been sitting with businesses up and down Broadway, bringing my laptop in there and my hotspot and having them join. A lot of these for-profit businesses up and down Broadway have never even heard that this was a possibility. Also, I made my way up to Lowry last week, and a lot of the businesses there also had never even heard that this conversation was even happening. A lot of the nonprofits definitely know that this is happening. They've been invited to the meetings, but a lot of these small businesses, they're actually trying to operate a business on their own. They are, sweeping the floors, running the register, doing the marketing, doing everything they can to keep their business open. And because of that, they cannot attend the meetings that Met Council and the city of Minneapolis and Hennepin County has been hosting. So I think that people have been left out of the conversation, and I don't feel that anything should move forward unless people that are going to be directly affected by this are engaged. And then as far as Olson Highway goes, yes, that actually was in the plans, but the issue is if we can't get the rights to the railroad along the western part of North Minneapolis, then it's just not going to happen. And I've talked to Irene Fernando, and they've offered a lot of money, way more than what it was worth, and they still are denying rights to that railroad. So now it's being pushed. The conversation is being pushed right now on West Broadway, and the engagement is actually, if you look at the Met Council website, the engagement is said to be done, and they're going to be opening it up for questions and feedback. So I'm worried when they're talking about, they've got all the engagement back, and then they're going to now hear back from people on this plan when there's businesses that said that they haven't even heard that this was.
We're at time. Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any more audience questions, so I'm going to go ahead and continue with our prepared questions. And Kristel, we'll start with you for this one. Describe your direct experience establishing and maintaining varied and complex partnerships. How will you use this experience as a city council member?
So yes, I actually was the executive director of Cleveland Neighborhood Association in North Minneapolis. And so with that work, I, through a lot of events, partnered with local businesses, especially North Memorial and businesses all over North Minneapolis, Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, Juxtaposition. My children have worked all over North Minneapolis. They're all in their 20s now. I coached in the parks for 16 years. I worked in the public schools for 7 years. I currently work in the schools now, North Henry and Edison high schools. I have relationships with people in every department of the city. I could go into every department in the city of Minneapolis, and people are going to know who I am in those offices because of the things that I've done. I've bought and sold a couple businesses in the last 15 years. And right now I run a renewable energy nonprofit. I serve on the Fresh Energy Board and of course the Sierra Club Executive Committee. And the relationships that I have just all over the city. And I also know every council member that's currently on the council right now and have lobbied them and spoken with them, especially with the Neighborhoods 2020 plan and the relationship with the neighborhood community relations and all the 70 neighborhood associations in the city of Minneapolis and help lead Northside Neighborhood Council. I founded plenty of different initiatives and programs, but my relationship runs deep with the community itself. They are my family. I left home when I was a teenager, and if it wasn't for the community.
Kristel, I think we lost your audio. And I think we've lost your video as well. Maybe get you back. Kristel, can you hear us? All right, we'll try to get Kristel back on. Why don't we go ahead and move over to Jeremiah? Same question, describe your direct experience establishing and maintaining varied and complex partnerships. How will you use this experience as a city council member?
You know, having being the incumbent and having some experience doing this in the job itself, you know, I think that I'm going to continue to leverage the relationships that I've developed in order to do some really creative things. And we talked about being creative when it comes to housing solutions, and so I want to try to take this 2 minutes to just explain, you know, one example of that. When I first got into office, we were dealing with the slumlord on the north side named Mahmoud Khan, and he was coming to the end of a 5-year battle with the city over the conditions of his properties, and he lost. He was a textbook neglectful landlord, had people living in awful conditions. But because of the way that the city had pursued adverse action against him, not only was he going to lose his rental license, which he deserved, but also by him losing his rental license, his tenants were going to lose their housing. And so, you know, we jumped into action trying to get folks rehoused as fast as we could. But we also had to come up with some different solutions for small groups of tenants. He had so many tenants that some of them had broken off into small groups to advocate for themselves. One group wanted to buy some of their homes from him directly, some of his properties that were in better condition. Another group needed a lot more support. And so with the tenants that wanted to buy their homes, we worked with the land bank and the land trust and the city to help these tenants who were considered, you know, unrentable, you know, vulnerable tenants, to help them buy their homes, which they currently own and operate as a part of the land trust. For the 10 tenants that weren't in the position to do that, the city actually bought the homes, which is something that the city's never done in its history. And we worked with Urban Homeworks to help manage that portfolio. And we're working with those tenants so that they can buy their homes in the future. And so these are some of the complex relationships it takes and some of the creativity it takes to really come up with housing solutions for vulnerable tenants in our city.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next question. We have another question coming from the audience. How can the Blue Line Extension project serve as a tool to catalyze wealth development in communities of color marginalized by systemic racism from building wealth? Do you have any ideas or plans to help businesses grow or start, and to help the ones we have in place thrive and not be displaced? So for this one, we're going to start with Jeremiah.
Sorry, just getting my own timer up here. Thank you for the question. I really appreciate it. I think that infrastructure can absolutely be a catalyst for good in our community. I think one of the original reasons that the Blue Line went down Olson Highway and then sort of rode the edge of North Minneapolis without really serving North Minneapolis, I'm talking about the old route, is because there wasn't a lot of intentionality, and the community could sense that lack of intentionality around the old route. And so, you know, I think that a few things need to be done. One is, during my time in office, and this isn't a housing thing, this is a commercial property thing, but I worked to create the Commercial Property Development Fund, which is a 2-year fund, which has enabled a lot of North Side entrepreneurs and small businesses to buy buildings on West Broadway and around West Broadway. And so for folks on the North Side who know, you know, organizations like Tri Construction, folks who know Kenya McKnight, folks who know Jamil Ford, they've been able to utilize this fund that I worked to create in my time in office, because I heard that a lack of access to capital was one of the reasons that that Northsiders were being locked out of wealth building in our city. Another policy that these aren't the only two, but another policy I think could be critically important is the tenant opportunity to purchase. So many of our housing stock is single family homes. And so, but what happens is that these investment properties, they end up getting bought and sold right underneath the tenant's nose. And a tenant doesn't even know when their landlord has changed. A tenant might not even know when their housing ownership has changed hands, or who they're supposed to report to. Tenant opportunity to purchase would give that tenant first right to buy that house. And if that was coupled with city financing, some municipal financing, the city could actually help that tenant. Now, all of a sudden, we're being able to close the home ownership gap. If we're helping folks buy duplexes and triplexes, then they can actually utilize, bring in revenue, and we're helping to build wealth in that way as well. So those are just a few of the things I think we need to do in order to make the Blue Line a benefit and not a liability.
Thank you. And Kristel, I'm going to read the question again. How can the Blue Line Extension project serve as a tool to catalyze wealth development in communities of color marginalized by systemic racism from building wealth? Do you have ideas or plans to help businesses grow or start, and to help the ones we have in place thrive and not be displaced?
Okay, so first of all, I'm going to apologize for the music in the background. I'm at a coffee shop near a farm that I'm staying at for the next couple of days. So, but anyway, yes, definitely. I've actually sat and thought about this for a lot. And I think that what we need to do is make sure that if the Blue Line does go down, whether it goes down Lowry or goes down Broadway, we need to be intentional about making sure that the businesses there do not get displaced. We need to make sure that we have a way to temporarily allocate them away from that corridor during the 3 years that the construction will take place. And then also work with them to make sure that they have the tools that they need to stay in business and operate in a successful way after the development happens. You know, one of the current plans is that, you know, after the development, they will have no parking on Broadway. And so what are we doing to work with them to make sure that they will have parking behind and have those things addressed? But also, while they are temporarily located away from that space during the time that that construction is taking place, are we acquiring land for them? Because, you know, there's going to definitely be purchasing some eminent domain that's going to happen, and some purchasing a property that's along Broadway from outside landlords that I know personally of. I don't know them as friends, but I definitely know of them, and they have been sitting on boarded up buildings for many, many years. What would it look like if we purchase those buildings from them, but also hold them and acquire them for the businesses that had to relocate during the time of the construction, and make sure that we're working with them to create partnerships with the other businesses as well, so that they also have a healthy relationship with the other businesses there. But also, we need to be intentional about making sure that we don't build 100% residential properties along Broadway, because we're missing out on a commercial tax base. We get twice as much tax base from commercial property than we do residential property. So we need to make sure that we are being intentional about making sure that we preserve that space on our commercial corridors, so that we're not taking away commercial space.
We're at time. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, so we're going to go again to some prepared questions, and this one we'll start with Kristel. As a city council member, what would you do to preserve and expand home ownership for households of color and first-time home buyers?
That's me first, right? Okay. All right. So one of the things I would say is when I got to purchase my house, I was able to get my duplex for $73,000. That is unheard of right now. If I wouldn't have been able to do that, I would not be a homeowner today. There's no way I'd be able to purchase a home today, right now in this housing market. And so what I think we need to do is get a little more creative. And this just might be the hippie in me, but I really think that we need to be more open to building smaller homes. And building more townhomes in North Minneapolis, tiny homes. I have a very large lot in North Minneapolis. It's a corner lot. It gets assessed more than all the other properties around me. And the building is getting very, very old. What would it look like if some of these homes that probably need to go and had to be torn down, you were able to put 4 smaller homes on that property and sell it in an affordable way so that people can enter the housing market. Like I said before, not everybody wants to have kids. Not everybody wants to get married and have a 3, 4, 5 bedroom house. Maybe they just want a 1 bedroom plus loft house. And so that way they can enter into the housing market. Also, maybe working with people and partnering people that want to enter the housing market that can't buy a house on their own. So what would it look like if we created a portfolio of people that want to become homeowners and they can partner together and buy a home together and live in it together, and in 3, 4 years later on, then sell that home and then be able to buy their own home, and then more people can move in it and do that in partnerships. But we need to get a little more creative. Not everybody wants to own a big massive home, and sometimes we just need something simple to be able to enter into the market so that we can at least start to build wealth and start at the bottom and work our way up, especially now when you can't even find a house less than $200,000 in North Minneapolis when you were able to 10 years ago for $25,000. So yeah.
Thank you. And Jeremiah, same question. As a city council member, what would you do to preserve and expand home ownership for households of color and first-time home buyers?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, I think I'm glad that tiny homes were brought up because, I actually had the privilege to co-author the changes to the building code that allow us to build tiny homes as a city. And I think that that is a direction that we need to move in. And if we're lucky, I think that Envision is a project that's moving forward, and we might get to see the first pilot of tiny homes being built right here in Ward 5. And so I'm fighting to make that happen. I also think that I know might sound like a broken record talking about tenant opportunity to purchase, but again, so many people rent single family homes. So many people rent duplexes here on the north side. And to have to allow people the first right to buy those homes would go a long way in helping us close the home ownership gap. And I want to make that real clear to people. We can provide incentives. We can, we can try to outspend some of these in investment portfolios. But I think that unless we're also giving people a real, first right to buy their homes, I don't know that we can get ahead of this problem. And so I think that TOPA is a critically important policy. I'm working on that with a number of colleagues right now, and hopeful that we can have something before the end of the year, if not early next year. And then lastly, I'll talk about the community land trust. I think the land trust model is a good model. It's not for everyone, but it does allow you to build some equity. I think criticisms are that it doesn't allow you to build all of your equity, which I think is a fair criticism. But when you have things like the housing market collapses, and you look at the maps of foreclosures, you see that the houses that often don't get foreclosed on are those ones in the land trust. And so I think that we can promote long-term home ownership and affordable home ownership through a little bit of expansion of the land trust model as well.
Thank you. All right, and I'm gonna peek again in the Q&A. Don't have any questions there, so we'll continue with our questions. And for this one, we'll start with Jeremiah. What is your position on maintaining a dedicated source of annual funding to produce and preserve affordable and accessible housing for residents of the city?
I am completely dedicated to helping us find a regular source, a dedicated source that goes to affordable housing. As I said earlier, we have an affordable housing trust fund, but it's not a true trust fund because it's really an allocation from the general fund. Now, we've done a good job of allocating millions of dollars and even millions of dollars more than we have in the past in these last couple of years to ensure that we are building enough affordable housing. But I think that we need to have a regular source. I talked about bonding as a potential way for us to go about creating that source. But the truth is that it's probably going to be really complicated, and it's something that we're all going to have to, as a community, as city staff, as electeds, agree on in order to make it work. And so I think that there's always going to be reservations in local government about changing the way that we've done things, but that's why people like myself are there, right? To create the renter first policy, to pursue TOPA, to pursue rent stabilization, which I was told would never happen in the city of Minneapolis, and look where we are. We're there to sort of push the envelope on what's possible and to take those ideas that people have been stuck on for years or for decades and hopefully come up with a solution. So, I'm committed to it. I'm not sure the exact pathway and what that funding mechanism looks like. I know that there are a lot of good ideas out there that I've been able to explore. And I'm hoping that I can collaborate with a number of colleagues to really nail down one of those ideas and say, you know what, this is going to be the future of how we build affordable housing. We have to be committed to it. We have to be locked in. It can't be one council putting in 50 million or 40 million, and then the very next council is putting in 10. And so, that's my commitment.
Thank you. We're at time. Appreciate it. All right, Kristel, what is your position on maintaining a dedicated source of annual funding to produce and preserve affordable and accessible housing for residents of the city?
Yes. Again, I'm going to apologize for the music in the background. It's really loud. So, I agree with Jeremiah when it comes to, funding via, bonding elections, creating affordable housing trusts. I think that we need to relax some zoning for sure. And I think that the way that we can revitalize our neighborhoods is, and I'm going to keep going back to tax increment financing, TIF districts, when Minneapolis was trying to prevent white flight from leaving Minneapolis when we had a spike in crime in the 90s. I think that we need to revisit that, and we need to boost our NRP again within our neighborhood so that we can get the funding that we need, especially when it comes to a lot of the organizations that have figured out how to become CDCs again, community development corporations that are working very diligently and to allocate boarded up vacant buildings and empty lots to be able to develop these this housing and sell it in for cost, which is very difficult to do right now. It does cost, like I said, it takes 3 to 4 years to be able to get the financing together to be able to even start, even to break ground. And so we need to be a little more creative on how we're going to finance those deals. And it's going to take a combination of our community organizations, CDCs, the city of Minneapolis, Hennepin counties, the state, on every level to be able to make sure that happens, because you can't escape the fact that the cost of materials and supplies is only going up. The property value is only going up. And a lot of developers are not going to want to jump through those hoops and jump over all those hurdles to be able to develop affordable housing when it's very easy to just go ahead and build market rate. So, yeah.
We're at time. Thank you. Thanks. All right. Just a couple of questions left that we're going to go through. And again, attendees, if you want to ask any additional questions, we're kind of getting to the end of our list of questions. So go ahead and write those in the Q&A. All right. So the next one, we'll start with Kristel. Do you think the city can improve upon its oversight of rental housing through regulatory services? If so, why and how? If not, why not?
Definitely. I think that as a city council any city council representative should be working very closely with regulatory services and figuring out why the inspections are not working, why they are not inspecting certain properties. and why things are not happening in a timely fashion. You know, I'm out in the community all the time. And, you know, one house in particular, you know, there was a lot of drug activity. There was two little girls jumping in and out of random men's cars. They were under the age of 8 years old. And the mother was on drugs and the house was completely tore up. And I did some research on that property, talked to my friends at CPED, talked to my friends at Regulatory Service, the Director of Inspections, and found out that there was no inspection that was ever done on that property. Yet there was 54 911 calls to that same property in the last year and a half. 54. And I wonder why there wasn't inspection done. And so we do need to be a little more intentional about, you know, keeping a close watch on some of these properties. I was one of the people that knocked on the Mahmoud Khan rental properties. I knocked on all of them 3 times in the middle of winter. And I did work on that initiative and I did work on that project and helped those families. So my thing is when I walked through their homes, they were in terrible disrepair. And so I think that, you know, just moving a property up to tier 1 based on no 911 calls, based on you know, nothing red flagged is sad. And I think that people, that the inspectors need to be a little more intentional about going in and making sure that these rental properties are actually safe and livable for the people who are renting them, and not just assuming because there's no 911 call that everything's good. So yeah, I think that we need to be working a little more closer with inspectors and making sure that people.
And we're out of time. All right, and Jeremiah, I will ask the same question. Do you think the city can improve upon its oversight of rental housing through regulatory services? If so, why and how? If not, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. I think we can improve, and I think we have. I think the renter first policy was a good step in the right direction. Again, for folks that are familiar with the Tenant Remedies Action, this is an action that allows allows the city to put a business into receivership, make some fixes in a property that is dilapidated or that is in disrepair without displacing the tenant. That's a big change from how regulatory services used to work prior to me being in office, right? Regulatory services used to have a model that was referred to as like a hammer, right? That meant that regulatory services came and they cited you and they charged you fines and fees until and the hope was that we could extract some money out of landlords who were being bad actors. But we weren't necessarily, as a city, improving the lives and conditions of the people in those homes. Since the passage of the Renter First policy, we've seen hundreds of units go into receivership, under that TRA, that Tenant Remedies Action umbrella. We're seeing tenant organizations like Inquilinos Unidos learn how to utilize the TRA in a way that protects tenants and holds these landlords accountable. I think that the well of bad landlords that we have to sort of uncover and the work that we have to undo is deep, but we've begun that work. And regulatory services, I think, has become a model for how you center the dignity of renters without just simply saying, oh, we're revoking a license, we are condemning a building, we're putting the tenant out with the landlord and calling it a day, right? I think that we are slowly becoming a model. The truth is that because we used to use regulatory services as a city as a way of wealth extraction, and that we're no longer using.
We're at time. Sorry about that. All right. So before I read the next question, just a heads up, this will be our last question for the evening. So do include any final statements that you'd like to within your 2-minute response to the question. And Jeremiah, we'll start with you. And you've already mentioned a little bit about this, but we can just have you expand on it. What is your position on a tenant opportunity to purchase policy, otherwise known as TOPA, for Minneapolis? Based on your position, what impact do you think it will have on residents who live in rental properties?
Yeah, absolutely. I am 100% for a tenant opportunity to purchase policy. It's also, for folks who might be listening, also referred to as a right of first refusal. policy is another term for it. And I think that a tenant opportunity to purchase policy, especially if it is coupled with some form of municipal financing, some form of municipal support to help those tenants who might not have the cash on hand, but who are interested in owning that home. I think that we owe it to our tenants to pass such a policy. This would mean that even if they didn't have the money, the property could no longer sort of exchange hands without them knowing and without them having a measure or a tool to intervene. It could give the city second right, right? The first right would be the tenant, could give the city second right, which would allow us to hopefully recover some of these homes back from these large divestment portfolios, investment portfolios, sorry, Freudian slip there. Like front yard residential, and I know that the shell companies go on and on and on. And so I think it's an important policy. I think it should be coupled with municipal financing. I think it would give people an opportunity to buy their homes, and I think it would help us close the homeownership gap.
30 more seconds. You want to take it for final thoughts? All right, going on. All right.
Hey, I could jump in if you're ready for me.
Yes, go on ahead. Thank you.
All right. Yes, I totally support TOPA. I definitely think it's an awesome thing that's being proposed, and I think that it's going to make a big difference for renters. And also, just like Jeremiah said, it needs to be coupled with municipal financing, but also, and because of the market is so high right now. So, the first time home buyers down payment assistance is just not enough unless you're going to have it match the growing market. Back when I was getting my first home, I got like a $5,000 down payment assistance. Right now, that would have to be $25,000 or $30,000 with the cost of housing right now. But also just making sure that people are able to even qualify is huge. When I hosted the North Housing Fair, and I actually hosted a lot of first-time home buyer classes out of Lucy Laney in North Minneapolis, and provided that opportunity for folks, and as a landlord, all my tenants actually came out of homeless shelters, and I helped them get their credit together and help them get connected to first-time home buyer classes and be positioned to buy a home. And a good portion of them are homeowners now in North Minneapolis, but it took sometimes 2 years to be able to position them to be a homeowner because they needed time to fix their credit. It wasn't just money to put down, but they needed that time. And so, I think that, yes, it's going to be awesome. And yes, with the financing needed from the city, but also how do we have a expedited program to help them be positioned to purchase that home when it has come up for sale? Because when a landlord is ready to sell, they are ready to sell. They want to sell right away. So what is the timeline? Otherwise, you're going to be, you got a home just sitting there that won't be sold and that could be sold. And then you've got a renter thinking that they're going to be able to purchase something, and then a year goes by and the home gets sold to somebody else anyway.
Thank you. Yep, and we are at time. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, candidates, for participating in our event today. It's extremely important for voters to hear directly from you about the issues that matter to them. And so we're so grateful for your time and your willingness to talk about affordable housing in our city. Thank you also to Maggie tonight for providing us with tech support behind the scenes. And to all those who attended the event, thank you for joining us this evening. If you have other questions related to affordable housing, you can contact candidates through the information they shared earlier this evening. And be sure to follow Make Homes Happen on Facebook, as we will share a recording of the forum on our page. Maggie's going to share a link to the Facebook page in the chat. Thank you, Maggie. And thank you so much, everyone. Again, thank you and have a good evening.